Hello and welcome everybody to the London Book Fair's Rights Essentials. My name is Orna O'Brien and I head up the seminars, conferences and awards at the London Book Fair. I'm delighted to be hosting this LBF live stream session on the very important topic of rights selling, something we do every spring on the eve of London Book Fair itself. In the next hour, we're really fortunate to have two superstars in the rights arena, Diane Spivey and Stephanie Purcell, Hachette UK's Group Contracts Director, and Simon Schuster's Group Rights and Co-editions Director, respectively. Following Diane's short introduction, there'll be two presentations, and then we'll culminate in a live Q&A where Stephanie and Diane will join us again. Thanks to all of you who submitted questions in advance. That was really helpful. And if you wish to submit a question now, you can do so once you are logged into your YouTube account. So let's get started with the London Book Fair's Rights Essentials. Over to Diane.
Hello, everybody. During today's talk on Rights Essentials, Stephanie and I can only skim the surface of what it means to sell rights in a publishing context. But I hope that this gives you the bare bones of what to do and shows you how you could be extending the reach of your titles and making more money from them through selling rights. So as you can see from the agenda on screen, I'll start with an introduction to what rights are in general, some examples of different types of rights, and ensuring that you hold the necessary rights to be able to sell them. Stephanie will then move on to the practicalities of how rights are sold, how various ways of working, the marketplace, the selling skills, and how to clinch a deal. And then I'll round off by dealing with some of the financial aspects and contractual aspects of finalising a rights deal. At the end, we hope to answer some of your questions and give you some pointers on where to go for more information or more training. What are rights? As you can see from the screen, the first description, a means of exploiting intellectual property in literary work by licensing other entities to use the content in designated ways, usually in return for payment. Well, what that means is that the rights we're talking about stem from the copyright in the literary work involved. So copyright is one of a number of intellectual property rights alongside patents for inventions and designs, and database rights for software development. And like other forms of property rights, they're owned by somebody, can be sold onwards or licensed to other people. So with very few exceptions, the copyright in a work is owned by the author or creator and can be assigned or licensed by them to somebody else. In this case, we're talking about rights in a book, but these can also be artistic works, photographs, films, plays, etc. And the copyright is automatically owned at the point of creation by the author, and they then assign the copyright to a publisher by selling it outright, or they can grant control of it to a publisher via a license. And the license will allow that publisher to publish for themselves, or also authorize them to license certain rights onwards to other parties, and agreeing a split of the money from that with the author. And that split is rarely less than about 50%. If the author retains a literary agent, the agent, on behalf of the author, might grant more limited rights to the publisher, perhaps just the right to publish their own edition in certain territories, and they will then retain the other rights on behalf of the author and control those and sell them direct. And they work with the author on the basis of retaining commission, usually 10 or 20%. Listed on the next couple of slides are some examples of the types of rights that we're talking about. And we're not going to be able to go into any detail about these sorts of rights in today's presentation. So for now, I'm going to give you the first of several plugs to Lynette Owen's book on selling rights, details of which are in the resources section at the end of the talk. This covers all different types of rights and gives specifics about the way they need to be licensed in different areas. So on the screen above, we've listed some examples such as selling US rights, licensing the right to publish for a low-cost edition in certain parts of the developing world, licensing the right to publish extracts from your work into another publication, which is called anthology and quotation rights or permissions, and, for example, licensing the right to produce a large print edition for people with a reading disability. All of these rights are a reuse of the copyright material, perhaps in a different territory, a different language, or but they're substantially in the same form or as some form of adaptation. For example, licensing to a US publisher might involve Americanizing the text, but it'll fundamentally be the same work. Licensing a local cheap edition might mean changing printed format to reach a lower price point. And extracts from works licensed for publication in other works will normally be straight verbatim to extract. But when you move on to different media, there is more adaptation involved. So for example, serial rights, which we list here, are extracts licensed to a newspaper or magazine, and they may require some adaptation to work in that medium. If you're selling audio rights, then you might need to add additional music or sound effects, or the work may actually have to be abridged or adapted to make it work in audio format. And obviously translation rights involves a translation, but it might also require some local adaptation of the content. So once you are reaching the area of totally different media, such as film or TV, and also things like merchandising rights, significant adaptation of the work is going to be required. But these are all still rights that fundamentally spring from the same work. And these rights that need more adaptation are often the ones that are retained by a literary agent if they're working on behalf of an author. The third examples we wanted to give were rights in the digital or electronic area, and this often causes a lot of confusion. So a quick word about licensing electronically. The first thing we list here is the sale of the publisher's own ebook edition, which could be via Amazon or Apple or Kobo or various other digital retailers. This isn't normally regarded as a sale of rights. This is normally handled alongside physical book sales and isn't under the remit of a rights license, or it's usually dealt with by the sales department. However, when it comes to the selling of rights, rights sellers have to be increasingly aware of the digital elements of the deals that they're doing. So for example, a French publisher will want to be able to publish an ebook in French. The audiobook version might have to be available by digital download, and as serial rights extract, the newspaper may well want to put it in their online version of the newspaper. And finally, the third point here is what we would think of as true sub-licensing of electronic rights, which is when you're licensing your content solely into electronic format. So perhaps to a software developer for an interactive game, or licensing content to a commercial database or website. For example, a health publisher might license some health tips to a company website, for example. So that's just a short number of the examples. The number of rights you can actually sell are as broad as you can imagine. And as I said, Lynette's book gives you advice on all different types of rights licensing. So coming on to the benefits of selling rights, why do we sell rights? Well, firstly and obviously, it's to make some money for the author and the publisher. And it's important to remember that other than selling the book through retailers or wholesalers or distributors, this is the only other income stream which is available to publishers. And it's an often neglected income stream, the money that can be made through rights selling. It also enables you to access new markets. It enables you to get your book to the parts of the market you may not be able to reach with your own edition. So that might be because you can't distribute in a particular territory, or because people want it in their own language, or that the pricing of the original edition doesn't work in certain markets. But for some authors and also some publishers, the financial side is not the only driver. It can be very important to disseminate important information via books. And for an author, notably those who are academic or have other specialist interests, it can be very important for them to build a global reputation, and the number of translation rights you can sell and the number of languages in which their book is available can be very important to them. And for books that lend themselves to adaptation to other media, there is a possibility even of creating a brand franchise. You only need to think about something like Harry Potter to see how broad that has reached. And all of these add to the ability to keep the book going and creating products and sub-licenses that will bring income to the publisher and keep the original work available, sometimes for decades to come. So it's important to check before you do anything that you control the rights you need. So I mentioned at the start that the copyright in the work belongs to the author. So as a publisher, you can't sell rights unless you have acquired those rights from the author, either as part of an assignment of copyright or as part of a license. So in many parts of publishing, such as educational or academic, or where a book, an author is commissioned by a publisher to do some work on a book, perhaps as what the Americans call work for hire, then an assignment of copyright for an outright fee is quite common. However, for most trade publishers, what you're acquiring is an exclusive license from the author to grant you a broad range of rights to publish yourself and to license onwards. So if you're approached by somebody to acquire rights from you, or you plan to start selling rights in a work, it's essential to check back with your author contract to make sure you control those rights. And the second point on this slide is extremely important. You need to remember that a book is likely to include work from other sources, whether that's illustrations or photos, drawings, maps, charts, all of these things, including cover artwork. You need to know that you've acquired the right to use that material not only in your own edition, but also the right to sublicense it on to other people. And if by any chance you have limited rights in those areas, you need to remember to inform your licensee that certain things need clearing by them directly.
Thank you, Diane. An excellent introduction to our session today. If you've just joined this YouTube session, Rights Essentials, we're now just about to hear from Stephanie Purcell, Simon Schuster's Group Rights and Co-Editions Director. And here it is.
So I'm here to discuss the more practical elements to rights selling. So how are rights sold? So if you're lucky, some deals may arise from customers approaching you, publishers approaching you, but you will get much better results if you actively promote and look out for potential rights partners. So first of all, we must come to realise that not all books have rights potential, and that's fine. And then some books may have only some rights potential in certain markets. If you've got limited resources, you don't have much time or money, it's important that you do this research in order so that you know how you can focus on the best way you can generate revenue. So preparation is key to selling rights. Look at your titles, which have the strongest potential. Is it US rights, educational rights, or sub-rights? Which markets are publishing these kinds of books? Non-fiction, academic, children's, fiction? What are the trends? And then also, is there a demand for rights in those markets? Look at the main players and who dominates that space. Which publishers are doing those kinds of books? And then once you have all this information, what I suggest you do is you create an Excel spreadsheet, which you can adapt easily to establish a rights database so that you know all the customers, the contact details, and also your titles, which in future they may be interested in. So this is it. And then the next slide is, what are your target rights market? So as we explained before, this is where you've done all your research. Sometimes it's good to think about a book in English language, whether it's possible to distribute it, and that might be the best option. But rights could be more interesting if, say, in an American publisher, they have more potential to access the market. A US edition will have their own imprint, they'll have a marketing budget, they'll be able to sell a lot more copies if you were just to distribute your own edition. Also, as we discussed before, especially for academic publishing, low price editions in India and Philippines, South Africa, if you can license a cheaper paperback edition for textbooks and educational market, this is the best option. And then translation rights, there's the whole world out there. Western Europe has a great tradition of buying rights, but also now China is a huge rising rights market. And obviously Spanish language, you've got all of South America as well as Spain. There's lots of opportunities for your product, and it's up to you to look at how you can get the best rights revenue for that. So how it works. There's different ways that you can work in selling rights, especially for academic publishing or more expensive niche publishing. It could be naturally for you to just go and find a partner and then in each direct market and contact them. It's a good way of kind of minimizing risk and also share resources. Direct contact is, for me, one of the best ways, because you're the only one that knows your product best. You know your books, you know your authors. So actually, after conducting all that research, you can then go and find your customers. And most importantly, you can develop really close relationships. Some of them may even become your friends. And then sub-agents. Sub-agents are really good in one way if you are just one person and you just don't have time to do all this research. This is a great way. They're there on the ground, they speak the language, they already have all the contacts for the customers, they're able to give back all the information that you need, and also they're partly helping you to get your books out, but at the same time they work for the publisher, so they've got a great kind of step between you and the publisher. Now the only point with them is that they will take 10% of commission of whatever money you earn, which in a way it's up to you if it's worth it. Also, they represent lots of different publishers, so you don't know where your book is pulled out if you've got a similar book. But it's up to you. You've got to meet them and decide. In Asia, most publishers use sub-agents. Now we look at the procedures. So you've undertaken your research. You have all the information you need. You know exactly which markets are perfect for you. Now you have to get in touch. LinkedIn is perfect. It's a perfect way of researching, and Facebook. Also, there's more focused publishing directories like the Literary Marketplace, rights guides, London Book Fair rights guides, people that are, have gone to a book fair, so they are interested in buying rights. There, you must find the commissioning editors' names. It's no use just sending out an email and it just lands there. You need to find out who to send it to. When you make contact, be very selective. Don't just send your whole list. They're not going to be able to look at that. You targeting will make all the difference. And also, whatever you send, you make sure that it's of the perfect quality. It has to be succinct, it has to be precise, and focus exactly on what they do, and then they'll know you've done your research. Once you've done that, now you have to decide what kind of rights you're going to offer them. So again, if you're an academic publisher or a specialist publisher, you should look at offering an exclusive option. This gives the customer time to assess your work, give it some thought, and also it's usually the more expensive it is, the more time you should give them. If you've got something that is kind of quite mass, you should just do multiple submission, send it out to several competing publishers, also send it to the sub-agent. This is a chance for you to really get out there and generate some excitement for your list. Make sure you look at the potential buyers and what they can offer you. For the rights guide, it's a good thing to get yourself a really, really good catalogue of all your rights. Spend as much time as possible on that document. It's really useful. It should be of very good quality. It should reflect your publishing program. You should always have it available on your website. You should send it out to your sub-agents. Also, you should send it out to any prospective customers. And if you've got book fair meetings, you should send it about 2 weeks before the fair. Now, the skills you need for rights. Obviously, enthusiasm, lots of it. You will have lots of rejections, lots of people are not going to be interested, but you just got to keep going at it, get up, and imagination, creativity. But you have to be realistic as well, like assess your projects and say what would be good and what isn't good. Communication skills are vital. Lots of rights people do speak other languages. It is not essential, as luckily enough, the majority of the world do speak English, but it really helps to connect with other customers if you make an effort. If you even learn to say hello in a foreign language, it really changes the relationship. Numerate, you need to calculate all those deals, how much money you're making. A good head for detail, especially if you're drawing up contracts. Administration skills, you always need to be adding information on your database, sending off invoices, documents, so you need to be able to be on top of that. Energy, lots of it. Book fairs are from 9 till 6, and then after that you'll be going off to seminars, workshops, so you really need to be able to deal with it. And then finally, a real interest in international markets and exactly what is happening around the world. This can affect your rights business. So face-to-face contact, this is crucial, I think, in rights selling. It's really important. Obviously, in the situation we are at the moment with the pandemic, it has been harder to do this. I will go through it now, what we usually do outside of this moment. But all I can say is that we have been doing virtual meetings with using Zoom and Skype, and that face-to-face contact really does help in your presentations. So, and the reason is that you do need those good relationships to build a rapport with your buyer. You understand what they like, what they dislike. That really makes a difference, and it's in book fairs usually where you make that connection. And there are many book fairs out in the world. They're listed here, but I would say the London Book Fair, Frankfurt and Bologna for Children's are truly the international book fairs that everybody attends. Some smaller book fairs, and it might be that your books are niche and they are very relevant to that area, do offer certain free access to the fair or accommodation, and this is a way to entice you to come to their fair, and you should look into this. Sales trips. So for me today, sales trips are crucial, and you will always make up the expense of whatever you spent on a trip. With budget airlines, with Google Maps, you'll have access to the local bus and train routes. It can be cheaply done, and it's a great way of really getting to know your customers, visiting them at their office, meeting the other members of the team. Outside the book fair, you'll have time to look at their plans, what they're looking at in the future. Also, it's a chance for you to actually get to know the territory you're visiting. So you could go to bookshops, see what's selling well, see how much books cost, also how much a coffee costs. The standard of living, all these things will help you in really understanding that market. Also, to have an opportunity to actually feedback any information to your team about that territory. So using trip reports, you can go to bookshops and see what formats are working, and artworks and so on. So that really all helps to feedback and to create better stuff for the following fair. But obviously the most important place where you will meet your customers and sell your rights are at the book fairs. In preparation for the book fairs, usually allow 3 months, even 4 months before the fair to start your appointments. Most people have half an hour, they schedule half an hour, and you have to allow for them to kind of get to there and leave the meeting. So 20 minutes to prepare your meeting. When you write to them, it might be that they don't respond, and it has to be that you might have to call. And this is something that you will be really scared about doing, but you just have to do it. You have to, you know, gather some strength. What I usually do is I practice a little pitch that takes 30 seconds, say who I am, why I think that it would be a great time to meet. And usually they respond very positively. And if they can't see you, say, well, can you look at my rights guide? Maybe next time they'll see you. Usually you would meet at your stand, but if you're new, you don't have a stand, and if it's the first time, offer to go to their stand. It will be hard because you'll have all your materials, so try not to, but if you have to, do so. Also, another thing is, if you are scheduling meetings, make sure that you don't kind of have all the countries in one slot, because usually they're competing, and it can get tense. So always make sure that you kind of mix your territories around. Book fair meetings. So preparation is key. Make sure that you have a sheet prepared with what the partners, what's their best sellers, what they're doing well, what they're interested in. If you've already met them, what books they've already looked at. This is where a good rights database comes in handy. Take all the materials that you need, make sure you have lots of pens, business cards, and decide how you take your notes. Notebook, iPad, laptop. Sometimes it can be distracting, so make sure that you just have a pen and paper just in case, and guard them with your life, because if you lose them, you're in real trouble. So in the half-hour appointment, so if you're meeting them in the first time, first of all, there should always be social interaction. Don't just jump in there. This is the time to get to know them. So, you know, ask them, how's it going? How's the first day? It really breaks the ice. Always have like a preparation of your notes, so that you can just give them a 10-minute. If they're running really late, make sure you give them like a 10-minute spiel rather than your 20-minute pitch. There isn't one way of pitching. Everybody pitches differently. Don't feel like there's one way is a success. What I generally do is I just do 1 or 2 lines of why this book is great. I usually find associated titles that I can compare it with, so that they can easily slot it in their head. And then if they want more, ask them, I'll send you more. Better to leave them excited. And also, if you feel like there's a passionate title that they missed in their guide, present it to them. Say, look, you might be interested in this. And then after the fair, this is actually the most important bit. You will be exhausted and tired, but actually the follow-up is crucial. Make sure that it's perfectly outlined. Remember that whatever sales material you're going to give, they're going to be presenting it to their editorial team. So you have to make sure that you're giving them the tools to give the best presentation to their colleagues and why your book is special. And then if they are interested, fantastic, that's great. Obviously, sometimes best offers are not the only thing that you have to think about. You have to think about the long life of the title. Is this the best customer for it? And negotiation is key. So you have to ask them, first of all, how many books they plan to print. What would the retail price be? Then you can work out your royalty rate. You can usually ask them, well, how would they market it? What are their plans to publish this? These are all the questions that you should ask, and take lots of time. There's no rush. Ask lots of questions. Also, there are co-editions, which is in this short presentation, it's hard to describe, but with heavily illustrated books or children's books or pop-ups, usually you have co-editions in which you gather all your interests and you print together. And those are a different type of negotiation, because it's more to do with print and manufacturing costs. So that again takes more time to administer.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was a really concise and clear presentation. If you've just joined this YouTube session, Rights Essentials from the London Book Fair, we're about to hear Diane Spivey's presentation. Diane is Hachette UK Group's Contracts Director. So let's hear from Diane.
So Stephanie's got us up to the point where a customer is about to make us an offer for a book, we hope, or you want to negotiate the terms. And the way financial terms for licenses work rather depends on the project, the market, and the type of rights which we're licensing. So for example, for a US publisher who wants to publish their US edition with very few changes, the royalties may well mirror the sort of royalty percentage that you're paying the author. So based on published price with cheaper rights received royalties for export or other editions. And you might be able to negotiate an escalator in that royalty rate after a certain number of sales. So as a rough guideline, you may be talking starting somewhere like 10% of published price, but that's always negotiable on individual deals. Some specialist publishers, even in America, may calculate royalties based on net receipts, but obviously for anything where you're getting the discounted price, you're looking for a higher starting percentage. Translations, on the other hand, the royalty rates are likely to be lower because the licensee also has to pay a translator. They may pay them a flat fee or they may be paying them a royalty, but they still don't have quite as much money to pay the original author. And in many markets, they do work on net receipts. Again, you're looking for a slightly higher royalty rate if it's net receipts. But you might again be able to agree escalators beyond the first print run or beyond the first certain number of sales. Rates might typically start at something like 7% of retail price, but it could be much lower for something like a children's board book or a series title where the price to the customer is cheaper. And again, you may be able to agree escalators. In most cases, you're going to want to agree an advance, and an advance is an upfront payment against which royalties are offset. And that payment can be made on signature of the contract. It might be split between signature of the contract and publication by the publisher. Or if the book doesn't even exist yet, you might split it 3 ways so that they pay you on signature when they receive the material and when they publish. And advances are important for 2 reasons. One is that they're a real indicator of the financial viability of the customer, because this is very much a trust business. Or for titles in high demand, where perhaps you've got competing offers, they're an indicator of the scale of the publication planned by the acquiring publisher. So they can help you to distinguish in, say, a competition or even an auction situation between 2 competing offers. Stephanie briefly managed co-editions where you're organising the printing for your customers as well as licensing the rights, and those deals could be so-called royalty inclusive or royalty exclusive. So royalty inclusive means you've included a nominal sum for the author for the author's royalty in accordance with your author contract in the price you're quoting the customer. For royalty exclusive deals, you're doing a print order for the books themselves, but then you're doing a separate license deal for the royalties and the advance. Some foreign language publishers like to do a set amount of money, set fee per print run, which makes it easier for small territories so you don't have to wait for money to come through on regular accounting dates. And from some other sorts of licenses, including serial rights to newspapers, payment is usually a lump sum. And also permissions fees, for example, when you're licensing an extract to another publisher, that would also be a set flat fee. Things like film and TV rights are usually on the basis of the customer paying an initial option fee while they go ahead and get the film set up. And then the remaining payment is usually only made if filming actually goes ahead. How those sums are calculated may be as a percentage of the film's budget, but film deals are extremely complex and may even need a lawyer involved to get the contract sorted, so it's quite a specialised area. Other non-publishing deals, such as merchandising, may follow the financial models more common in their own industry, so it's important in this area to ask plenty of questions, as you're not necessarily going to be a specialist in how clothing manufacturers or even food manufacturers work. In my experience, they tend to pay net receipts royalties at a much lower rate. They could be for a much higher volume, and they may offer a minimum guarantee of payments rather than an advance against royalties. And finally, on this slide, I just wanted to mention something, because we have in the past talked about granting licenses free of charge for use by disabled people. And nowadays, these are subject to an exception to copyright, so you don't actually need to license these people to do accessible editions. They have the right to do so, although they may come to you for files which you are entitled to charge for if it's going to cost you money to supply them. So once you've got the book to the deal to the point where you've agreed all the terms, you're going to need to transfer those details into a contract. So every deal needs an appropriate licensing contract, which is usually issued by you, the seller, the publisher. And the idea is it covers every aspect of the deal and is fair to both sides. So it defines the rights that you're going to grant. And you can limit those rights by length of a license. It's fairly common for translation rights, for example, to be on a shorter license, 5, 7, 10 years, something like that. You can license by the specific edition of the work, so they might have to re-license if they meant to do a second edition. You might define it by territory in which they can publish, by the language in which you're granting them the rights, by a medium or format, and also whether it's exclusive or not. So most deals would be exclusive in that particular territory or language, but things like permissions, anthology and quotation rights, that would be just a short non-exclusive license to that person. The contract needs to include all financial arrangements, the responsibilities of both parties, when they're going to account to you for monies, and also it's important to include termination provisions, because you do definitely want to know you can get the contract back and revert the rights if something goes wrong. And they also need to specify the operable legislation, so they need to state whether it's under English law or under the law of another territory. This is, again, a complex area, and it's difficult to give anything other than a few pointers at this point. And again, a plug for Lynette. Lynette is the general editor of Clark's Publishing Agreements, a book of precedents, which again we mentioned in the resources, which has some really useful notes as well as some standard contracts that you can copy. And it's important to remember that some licensees will need you to raise an invoice as well as signing the contract in order to give us the money that there's been agreed. So a couple of other things to remember before you finalise that contract is your original author head contract may require you to get author approval for rights deals. And so it's important to check back with the author or author's agent before finalising. And it's also courteous to let authors know a deal is going ahead, even if you're not contractually obliged to do so. And it should be good news. It's nice to be able to pass on good news to an author. You need to check carefully whether a licensee wants to make any changes to the book before finalising the contract, as that might affect your decision, but it also might affect what the author feels about the deal. So you need to look out for addition of forewords or local material, or removal of material for length, because it can be quite, some books are very expensive to translate. But more importantly, you need to be aware of censorship in some markets, such as China or Vietnam, and you need to clear any changes that are proposed with the author to make sure they're happy about those changes. And finally, a pointer from my contracts background is please do check the legal name of the person, the company you're dealing with, because you may know them under an imprint name or a divisional name when the contract needs to be with a parent company. And also check out whether any local legal or financial requirements need to be reflected in that contract. So once you've got that contract signed, in fact, I'm just going to divert slightly to talk about getting contracts signed in this current climate. Obviously, we have been making a great deal of use in the last few weeks of electronic signature, such as DocuSign or EchoSign. And provided both parties are happy with that, that is legally sound in most territories and is a very quick way of speeding up the process when we are dependent on electronic means of communication. But you do need to ensure the contract gets signed promptly by both sides. And when you've got it signed, you need to ensure you keep a copy of the contract and its terms either on your database or alongside your head contract records to refer back to, because you need to be clear what rights you've already sold in what territories. You also need to inform the author about the deal if you haven't done already, and you will need to spread the news amongst your internal colleagues. So, for example, the editor, the royalties department who will be expecting to receive money, and also possibly your export department for some translation deals, as it can really enhance their sales of the English language version of a book as well. You need to provide your licensee with any information or material that they need to make their successful publication. And that starts with things like a couple of copies of the book, obviously ensuring it's the most up-to-date edition and includes any corrections that have been made. And those can usually be supplied free of charge. But if they require files from you to be able to produce their edition, we would normally charge for those. And that can be done, that needs to be agreed at the time of the contract, but it may be reflected outside the contract because none of that money goes through to the author. That's just a fee for the publisher. But also things like sales figures, if they're impressive, good reviews, and details of your own marketing could also help the publisher sell in their own territory. And finally, it's very important to monitor publication schedules and make sure they publish on time, and also ensure that you receive any finished copies that you've asked for yourself and for the author. And for things like serial rights, you need to check that the extracts are going to appear as scheduled because they're notorious at bumping things from one issue to another. And you need to continue that monitoring throughout the length of the license. You need to make sure that sales statements are regularly being supplied and royalties are being paid. And if you've limited the contract by time, say a 5-year license, you need to check ahead of that expiry date whether you're going to extend it and possibly renew it with a new sum of money, a new advance, or whether you're just going to let it expire. And you need to think about what you're going to do with books that are regularly revised. So if you've got non-fiction titles or schools or academic titles which go into several editions, are you going to aim to license later editions to that same licensee if they've performed well, or are you going to move on to somebody new, which could have copyright complications with some of the original material? But I think the point I want to stress here is that what we're aiming for here is to build good relationships with good, reliable customers so that we can keep coming back to them and they can be regular and profitable publishing partners for years to come. So I think that brings us to the end of the explanation of how to sell rights, and we're going to leave you here with a slide of useful resources. We mentioned the Clark's publishing agreements, Lynette's Selling Rights books, and also there is a Selling Rights course which both Lynette and I speak on, which runs twice a year at Senate House at the University of London. And of course we do a regular session at the London Book Fair in its normal format, so when that's back up and running there'll be a more extensive rights workshop alongside that.
Thank you, Diane. You've made contracts and the financials much more easily understandable. So let's move on now to our live Q&A session, and we have Stephanie and Diane back with us. We'll start with a question that came in first. This one's from Greece, from Eleni. How does one get into publishing, particularly rights, without a degree in English? For example, with a law degree? Stephanie, you might like to take that?
Yes, so for rights, you don't necessarily need any kind of law degree or English degree. In fact, now there's been a real drive for diversity in the UK and in the US. So actually people with any kind of background with a passion for books has the opportunity to join publishing and to join a rights department. Generally, we like to look for someone that's volunteered or been able to have work in a bookshop or a library or helped out in any kind of venture with books are involved. And in rights, sometimes I look for someone that's worked in a shop or had opportunity to kind of meet face to face with customers or had to negotiate a bit, you know, some different kind of life experiences. That's
lovely. Thank you. And a question, I think, for Diane, and this one is from the UK, from Susan Greenberg. What can one safely omit from an author contract so that a more streamlined version still covers the essentials?
Thank you. Yeah, an interesting question. Contracts can terrify people if you're not used to them, but they can be relatively simple. My first bit of advice would not be to try and avoid using legalese, try and avoid using legal language like herein, hereunder, heretofore. Just try and spell it out in simple English, or simple language anyway. It does sometimes mean the contracts are longer. You mentioned, I think, in your question that they can run for pages sometimes, but as long as they're clear, that is better. Second thing to say is, if you can't understand your contract, you're not going to be able to explain it to your author. So do work with things like Clark's publishing agreements that we've mentioned earlier, which has a lot of note sections which explains why some of the clauses are there in the first place. And then finally, a couple of bits of advice. I would always try and follow the publishing process in your author contract. So you start out with what they're going to deliver to you, and you work through the various processes, through publication, through promotion and sales, through accounting, right through to the termination of the agreement at the end. And secondly, it's possible to extract some of the commercial details and put them, say, in a schedule at the front or the back, so that the main body of the contract, you don't need to fiddle with the wording, and you can explain that once to an author, and then all they've got to look at is the actual specifications in a schedule at the front.
Lovely. Thank you. One here from India, from Chulika Publishers. Publishing is badly hit by the pandemic. Is this a good time to be even sending out rights catalogues when acquisitions may be on hold? This one for Steph.
Yes, so, well, actually, most of the publishing world works way ahead. So actually, most editors are now acquiring for 2021, 2022. So they are looking for new projects. And in a way, even when there is a long-term, like a crash in 2008, actually publishing always survives these kind of great big ups and downs in the economy, because people love books. They turn to them for education or for entertainment. And in children's books, actually, sometimes sales rise because parents would rather give up other things than give up books which have an educational element and actually quite cheap as entertainment goes by. So no, it doesn't really affect us at the moment, and editors are acquiring at this moment.
Excellent, thank you. One for Diane, and this is from the UK, from Fernando Concha. What do you think of the new National Emergency Library? What are the implications for UK publishing? What is it, Diane, first of all?
Okay, well, the National Emergency Library is an initiative that's been started by a body called the Internet Archive, which currently offers 1.4 million books, mostly in copyright works, available for free to loan out on the basis that there should be free access to this sort of material. And they're using the argument in doing this emergency library that public libraries are closed and therefore people should have access to all of these books. If you want a fairly swift response, I would point people to the Society of Authors website, where they're very clear that they believe this is piracy, pure and simple, that what is happening here is they're making things available and it's going to affect the livelihoods of authors and publishers. And I think the main question is what happens afterwards. If it's an emergency measure, we can all try to help in the current emergency. For example, amongst the things I know that Hachette are doing, Hodder Education is making a lot of its online learning resources free to parents and teachers. And Hachette has a scheme where they're making ebooks available to NHS workers free of charge. And we're also experimenting more with making our own ebooks available in public libraries. But in the long term, this should be an author or publisher decision. The analogy I like to make is that our local coffee shop in these difficult times is giving away cups of coffee to key workers to keep everybody going. I don't imagine that's a long-term a chance, that a thing that they're going to carry on doing. It just isn't sustainable as business.
Excellent, thank you. There's one in from a literary agency in Italy, from Anna. It's about the audio rights in the contracts. Does it make sense to have separate addendums, as in ebooks sometimes?
you want me to take that one?
Yeah, please, Diane.
Yeah, okay. I think it rather depends on what the customer, how the customer is set up currently to use audio or ebook. More commonly, people are asking for them to be included in the grant of rights, and that's fine as long as they are in a position to exploit them, either by licensing them on or by exploiting them themselves. But until you know on what basis they're going to use those rights, it's quite difficult to set royalty rates, especially when things like subscription schemes are involved. So I would say if you know what their plans are, by all means include it in the grant of rights in the main contract. But if you want to either limit the term even more or to only grant it once you know exactly what their plans are, it's possible to do it as an addendum to the contract later.
Thank you very much. One for Stephanie now. This is from Teresa Duskova, and she's asking what the UK standard rates are for fees and advances. Stephanie?
Well, obviously Diane brought this up in the seminar not so long ago, but there isn't a standard fee. How long is a piece of string? My job is to try and get as much money possible, and publishers are trying to obviously make their P&Ls work, and they're trying to kind of minimize the advance that they have to spend. So generally, what we always ask is what print run is it going to be, what retail price, and then also what format. And then from there, Diane already pointed out the royalty rates. That's how you work out generally what an advance should be. And then after that, it's negotiation.
Excellent. Thank you very much. There's one come in fact, a couple have come in regarding self-publishing. I wonder if Diane, you might have something to talk about that. Someone's asking about self-publishing, selling rights to their own publisher and then selling it on to other publishers.
I think it's one of the forgotten parts of self-publishing. I mean, in self-publishing, you can usually buy in most of the expertise you need, whether it's cover designers or typesetters or even a promotional person to do your PR and publicity. Rights is a little bit more difficult. I have heard of one or two literary agents who do sell rights on behalf of self-published authors, though I'm not up to speed with that, I'm afraid. But I'm hoping that today's session will at least give an idea of how you could handle it if you are faced with queries about right selling from outside yourself.
Excellent. And there's one about, it might be too detailed, but if you could give some tips maybe on how to handle an auction. Stephanie, do you want to try that one? Or?
Yes, obviously there's different ways to handle an auction. You can just go straight in and ask everybody to, first of all, show their interest by a certain date. And then after that, you just say best offers. And you just wait for everybody to give their best offers. Other ways of working at it is that you have different rounds. So you will have round one, where say 7 publishers will submit their offers. You will look at them and then you will select the top 3, and then you will move to the second round. Those are much more complicated, and you have to be an experienced rights person to do that. So yes, there's different ways, but my top tip is to just give complete and open communication. Give every publisher the same information and the same time, and then you won't get yourself into trouble.
Excellent, excellent. There's a question in from China here, from Ida Ling. How to sell popular books rights online during this epidemic? Diane, any tips?
Actually, I think I will push that one off to Stephanie, if you don't mind, because
Okay.
I've seen even in our own company the way our own rights teams really moved online very, very quickly when they knew the London Book Fair was not going to be happening. So perhaps you could share a few tips, Stephanie.
Lovely, thanks, Stephanie.
Yes, well, what we did is we literally had a virtual book fair.
So we were in touch with our customers, and we shared on either Skype or Zoom our rights catalogue. We went through the rights catalogue, showed the material online, and then after that proceeded with all the negotiation online. So it was actually fine that we just conducted our business very similar to what we would do at book fair. The only, I would say, difference is that usually at book fairs you gather momentum on certain projects and you get this excitement, which I'm afraid you don't get as much online. But that's the only, I would say that's the downfall that we've noticed.
Thank you. One more from Ali Acer, and he has said, what would be your best recommendation for right sellers of so-called small languages, considering the many disadvantages compared with English written titles?
I'm happy to say something, if you like.
Diane, thanks. Yeah, lovely.
There is obviously a huge advantage to having some material in English, and whilst I would strongly recommend against getting the whole book or project translated, it is worth making sure you've got a synopsis and perhaps some sample material translated, either into English or into at least another language that people will feel a little bit more comfortable with, some of the languages that are used more globally. And from that point, and also perhaps getting an English language deal or an American publisher's deal, that can then open up a lot of other territories to you after that, because it's obviously much easier for people to look at the material.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, I think we'll draw to a close there. Thank you so much, Diane and Stephanie. That was hugely informative. And thank you for your time and your thoughts. I know I learned a lot, and I hope that all our viewers and listeners did too. That concludes our session, but it will live on, hosted on the Hub and the London Book Fair website. And I want to thank you all for joining us from Finland, Australia, USA, India, China, Pakistan, UK. I could go on, but thank you so much for joining us. Goodbye.